morning, everyone. Welcome to, I don't know what this track is called, Take It Home, the 11 to 12:30 piece. My name is Raquel Thiessen, and I'm from the Kansas Leadership Center. Yes, way Midwest. Came all this way, my first time in New England, and love it. Chris and I, my colleague, you'll get to know him here in a second, but we were talking about, like, how do we introduce ourselves? What do you really need to know? And we landed on, tell you all something about the intersections of our lives that make it right for us to be here at the front of the room doing this work with you today. And so the things from my past and current that make it right for me to be here today is I've been an entrepreneur. I was an elected official. I ran a chamber of commerce. And now I do leadership development for the Kansas Leadership Center. So for all those reasons, I think it's, makes some sense that I'm here. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. All right. I always ask myself that question, like, why do I belong here? And so I'm thinking really quickly. So I'm a lifelong Kansan. Grew up my entire life in rural Kansas. I care about rural communities deeply, but that's not enough. It's also where I've been working my entire career. I started out of college working for the State Department of Commerce, running, everything from grant programs for nonprofit rural hospitals to supporting rural entrepreneurs to eventually even doing legislative work for rural communities, building coalitions to pass bills that help communities. And then I went to the Kauffman Foundation, where I launched a rural portfolio and led rural entrepreneurship support strategies and grant making in the middle of the country and parts of the country around the U.S. And now for the last year, I've been with the Kansas Leadership Center, where we teach an adaptive leadership framework that Raquel's going to talk about and help us work through. But what I love about it and why we are here in the front of the room is that, we've spent 2 days now hearing about the aspirational futures that we all want for our communities. And this is always an interesting part of a summit where you're filled with ideas and inspiration and hope. And everything that makes the work difficult, makes progress difficult, is waiting for you when you get home. And we've all been in this spot. I've been in that spot. And you're like, how do I take what I've learned and what I've dreamed up and do this at home? And that's what we're going to talk about, like all the messy stuff that makes that progress difficult. And so that's why we're here.
Okay, and so you probably have sensed already that we're going to do things differently. We're not going to lecture. There is no slide deck to tell you about all of our fabulous ideas. You all are actually going to do the work. And we've put you in pods of 4 on purpose. So if you haven't found a pod of 4 to sit with, I encourage you to do so. And if you need to move chairs around, like this is where you sit knee to knee and you're gonna talk to one another. And as folks come in, if we need to form a group of 5, fine. Just make room, make space for everybody that comes into the room. Here's the other thing. This is one of those sessions where it's probably hard to hide. She's like, oh, dang, I know. Because it's not lecture, it's not presentation, it's you doing the work. You're sort of in a seat and you're kind of committed now till 12:30. We'll honor that time boundary, but fair warning, that's where we're headed. This is work for you to do. And we're just going to facilitate that process for you. So to kick us off, in your small group, 3, 4, 5, whatever you are, I want you to begin having some conversation with your group mates about some leadership challenges, this thing that's been bubbling up for you over the last day and a half, 2 days. This thing, maybe you brought it to New Hampshire with you. You came to this conference already wondering, like, how am I going to make progress on this thing? It's been bugging me for months now, and I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. Or maybe you've heard something in the last couple of days, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, now I know why I'm struggling, or I know why this isn't getting off the ground, or I understand, I'm getting a better sense. Maybe not fully understand, but I'm getting a better sense of why this is, stirring around in my brain and I can't make the progress that I want. Or I'm a part of a team back somewhere and we can't make the progress we want on this project, this initiative, this idea, this what we would call adaptive challenge. meaning there's no clear solution, there's no, straight up easy way forward. You're just wrestling with it. So talk amongst yourselves about that thing that you're wrestling with. That hopefully, because of your 2 days here, you get back home, you get back out there in the wild, and you want to start making progress. That's where we're going. So take about 8 minutes or so to have that conversation amongst your group. I'll set the timer and we'll check in with you. Okay, thank you. I would love to just give you the rest of the time to keep digging into these conversations that you're having, but I'm committed, Chris and I are committed to introducing you to a couple more ideas, a couple more tools that the Kansas Leadership Center uses a lot. This next piece is, we call it a faction map. So I talked earlier about the factions that sometimes get in the way. And sometimes there are factions that help us move things forward. There are factions that don't care. Whatever the issue is in the middle, there are factions connected to it. And so I want to take you through very quickly a faction map that was connected to a project that I worked on when I was an elected official. Now, you could replace anything in here with whatever your, a new library, a new product line, a new funding stream, a new funder, whatever this thing is that you want to make progress on, you'll get to do that for yourself. But I wanted to give you a quick example first, because just to say, hey, go make a faction map, you'd look at me with blank stares, and we wouldn't have been worth our salt. So what's a faction map? You put the issue at the center, and in this case, it was a new library. The new library had been built in 1971, and we were still operating with the new library. It didn't matter that all of the historical records in the basement were now wet because the roof leaked and the walls leaked, and it didn't matter that we didn't have new materials to put in because we didn't have shelving units. Who cares what, the young population in the community wants? We're still going to run the library like we always have, under the same old building we've always had. There was a movement by a few people in the community, the city commission, the governing body, at the head of that pack, that said, hey, look, we probably ought to consider this. But there were some factions, and I've started to name a few of them, that cared about a new library, that we needed to contribute to the conversation in the community about a new library. And so I wonder, what I want you to do is, I'm gonna make the factions here on the map, and maybe Chris will record them for us. But I want you to name who you think those groups of like-minded stakeholders might be that cared about a new library in my hometown. And the city commission, that's our local governing body. So maybe you call them city councils. Do you have city or county governing bodies? So this was a city commission made up of 5, and that was different. That's different from the administrative team at the city. Now, to say that the city commission was a faction wouldn't be quite right, because not all of the city commissioners agreed. So we had elected officials that agreed we needed a new library. We had another faction of elected officials that said, no, we don't need a new library. You would put those on your map, okay? Would you put?
Yep, I'm on it.
What are some other factions that you think might have been a factor in this? Yes?
Like Main Street businesses?
Yeah, interesting. Main Street businesses. This was a library downtown, located downtown. Yes? Patrons of the library. Who else would care about this? Taxpayers. What about taxpayers? Give me a little bit of...
Taxpayers that are concerned about their taxes going up.
Right. No new taxes. The no new taxes faction. Was there another faction of taxpayers? Okay, we got moms with kids. What else? Who? What? Staff members. Library, right? Library staff members? Yeah, they're the ones cleaning up the water mess in the basement every time it rains.
Social service agencies who use the library
Sure. Right, the homeless population, social service agencies. Students, yes, of all ages, but we could even divide that faction into, we've already got moms with kids coming to the library, but, you know, I see when my kids bring home the flyer, the weekend newsletter, it's like, oh, this event's happening at the library for teenagers, right? We got kids that might be going to the library on their own, or not, because there isn't space for them. Sure. Like as in senior citizens, not seniors in high school, okay. Sure. People that need access, yes. What's that? Writers, a quiet place to work. Mm-hmm. We can't, yeah. Absolutely. People want to ban books. Oh, yeah, that. Who else?
New citizens, new American, so, our library does a great job of civic engagement, like first touch.
Okay. What about the faction that says libraries are outdated? Why do we need a new library for? I want this thing instead. The digital, yeah, the faction of digital frontier advocates. Or sure, yes.
I kind of have to push back about the digital because the library has embraced digital.
Yeah.
They embrace digital.
Well, I'm just saying, there are people that embrace the digital age and people that don't. And you take digital age and you've got two factions immediately, maybe a few more. This isn't just those that are in favor of a new library, right? There are a lot of people on here that might say, no. We need better streets in our community. Why don't you fix the water rates? Because they're too dang expensive. Or why don't you take some of those tax dollars that you're going to use to build a new library and get rid of that dilapidated crap hole on the, right downtown Main Street?
Can't we repair and reuse the old libraries?
Yes. Why do we have to build new? Yes. Yeah.
What about people that just don't know what the library does, the uninformed?
The uninformed and the unaware. Right. There are probably 10 or 12 more factions that we could put on this map. And here's the cool thing. You can do a faction map on a napkin at a restaurant. You don't have to have fancy flip chart paper, and you don't have to have this fancy worksheet that I'm going to give you here in a second. Drawing a, what? You need, yeah, carry one of those around. I'm here for dinner, and I've got my Post-it chart. Because I might need to do a faction map because I'm having this dinner conversation with my friends, right? Just use a napkin. This is a tool in and of itself just to get clear and have a better understanding of who really cares or doesn't care. Even if they don't want it, they still care about a new library because they're going to do everything they can to stop it. The other thing about doing a faction map is when you get clear about who's against your idea, you've suddenly opened the door for some different interventions that you might need to make in your community in order to make progress. Because if you just ignore them, they don't go away. They'll come down the line later and sabotage your work in other ways. So let's get really clear right up front who we've got to work with, supporters or not. So you've got your issue at the center. This is what I want to make progress on, our leadership challenge. We've got all of these factions in the community. The next step is to box them off and start to get curious. And you have to do some supposing. I suppose donors, they value these things. And you might write down what they value. They value being philanthropic. They value the library's, future. They value, demonstrating to their kids that you support a library financially, right? So you go through the values. And then you spend some time talking about what they're loyal to. Well, donors are often loyal to the organization that they're putting their money to. They're probably also loyal to just giving money in general. And it might mean they've got a pool of dollars and they're deciding who's going to get that money. Is it the library or is it going to be the homeless shelter, right? So they're loyal to giving money, but maybe we have to consider that they might not be loyal to the library, right? So you start teasing out the values and loyalties of all of the factions. Now, yes, it would take some time to do that for all of these. As you're building this muscle to build a faction map, pick 2 or 3 factions and do the values and loyalties work for just those 2 or 3. Maybe you could even pick the issue in your organization. Hold on, I'll get to you. Pick the issue that you're working on in your organization, do the faction map, and then divide the factions up by team members or board members and say, hey, could you go think about values and loyalties for that faction or 2, right? Give the work back to some others in your organization and let them bring some of that back to you. And then there's one more thing, and this is another layer, and you don't even have to get to this yet. But it's important to think about, if we made progress on building this new library, what might some of these factions lose? Again, not everybody wants the new library. And if the faction that says, hey, no new taxes, if we make progress on this new library project, what's the faction of no new taxes going to lose? Well, they might lose trust in their elected officials. They might actually lose some more dollars because there may be a tax increase coming. Be thoughtful about what those factions could lose if you make progress. The factions that say, yes, heck yeah, move forward with the library, and then it doesn't happen, what's the potential loss for them? Any guesses? Any thoughts? They don't get behind your next thing? Possibly. Right. The votes aren't coming your way. Sure.
I think they also might lose energy for advocating for change. I mean, it's sort of like, okay, if I'm gonna
Absolutely.
stay doing this job, I just kind of have to accept that it's gonna go along.
Yeah, absolutely. When I hand around the worksheets, because you're going to get a couple minutes to do this for yourself, connected to whatever's in the middle here for you, there's another piece on this faction map that asks you about, how much do I need them? Right? How much do you need that faction in order to make progress on your thing? And here's the tip. You're not looking for just the people that agree with you. Right? How do you scale your business and build a new product line? Well, it isn't because you just go to the echo chamber and have everybody tell you that you're great and everything you've ever made and sold is wonderful. Go to the people that say, I don't know. You maybe need to think about it like this. Have you ever considered this viewpoint? Right? So get some sense of who you need. And the higher you rank them in terms of need, I need them, those are the people you're going to go have conversations with first. Because ultimately, what comes out of this faction map and doing all of this diagnosis work is then figuring out, okay, now here are some experiments. Here are some things that I think I need to try or things I need to do in order to keep moving the needle on this thing that I care about. And we're going to get to this designing some experiments here in a bit. But we're going to do a faction, you're going to do a faction map, or at least, go through the motions, kind of get used to the idea of doing a faction map. We talk all the time at the Kansas Leadership Center about building muscles. We're leadership development experts. And we help people think about changing their behavior. Well, one of the ways you change your behavior is to try out that new muscle that you didn't know you had. Maybe you don't know that you have a faction map muscle until today. So you're gonna practice building your faction map muscle here in a second. There are, on the backside, are some tips, some do's and don'ts or things to consider. I think I made enough. Everybody can have 2. You get one that you can work on right now, but a blank one you can take home. And make copies if you want to. That's totally fine. We want to proliferate the world with faction maps so that you get better at diagnosing what gets in the way. So if you would just be so kind, take one and pass them back, or take 2 and pass them back. Right, if you have a writing utensil, this will be the time to get your writing utensil out. It is tiny print, and I apologize for that, but you could just look at one of those squares and start thinking about, what is this faction? Who are the factions that care about my thing? Start with that. You're gonna have about 10 minutes here, so not a huge rush. I would love to get a few examples from the audience here. So this, you don't have to name every faction that you identified, but maybe tell us what's your issue in the middle and give us one of your factions and just talk to us for a second about what you said about their values and loyalties and losses. So, willing volunteer? Yes, Michelle.
The issue in the middle is new daycare, and I'll get a little bit more specific than I am thinking about one in a specific region.
New daycare in a specific region. Okay.
So I have parents, taxpayers, women, state legislature, local businesses, executive branch as factions.
Yes.
And then I'll say that I didn't flush out many of them. But
That's okay.
I was thinking about the executive branch, and Liz. I was really struggling with the values.
Okay.
And you made a suggestion that, think about what got people where they are, and maybe that is a way to think about values. And I found that really helpful, specifically for the executive branch. So I thought of like power and ambition. And then also, we kind of talked about, you might have that assumption, but maybe once you dig in, you'll find out
Yeah.
there are other values there. I hope there are. If I could assign power and ambition as their values, but loyalties to voters and to parties, and losses to deep votes in this example. So
Sure.
that's really the only one.
Okay. No, that's perfect. You don't have to have flushed out all of your factions, and I would guess that you haven't even identified all of the factions yet. One of the things that the Kansas Leadership Center values deeply, and pretty much our entire framework is built on, is the idea that you have to do really, really good diagnosis long before you move to solutions. Now, just a tiny little side note. I love that you have the solutions slam at Radically Rule, but there's that little piece of me like, really? We're gonna focus on solutions? How do they even know that's the right solution? Like, I wanna just go deep on diagnosis. Sometimes I gotta hold myself back, but that is one thing that shapes KLC. You've gotta do deep, really thorough diagnosis so that you don't end up just applying a Band-Aid.
Another question that came up in our group kind of related to that is, are we supposed to be projecting our own definition of what their values are and their loyalties?
Yeah.
Or do we should be talking to them and trying to, get curious about what their
Yes, and, right? Do enough in the beginning to have some sense about, okay, do I really need this faction? Am I gonna have to work across this faction or with this faction? Then you decide, yes, I need them quite a bit. Then you go to them and say, hey, look, I'm making some assumptions. And before I just, lock these in stone, I want to have a conversation with you about what you value and what you're loyal to, right? Some of the things that get in the way of communities and businesses and organizations making progress is that we assume we don't have the same shared purpose, or what's driving the purpose is unclear. And when we do this kind of diagnostic work and we start to have those conversations about values and loyalties, we might get to purpose that we didn't expect, a common purpose. And it's easier, a heck of a lot easier, to mobilize people around a shared purpose. But you won't know that until you push the pause button on implementing all your good ideas and go back to diagnosis first.
And then there's another question that got raised for us. What if they pronounce one value, but their behaviors
Oh, sure.
suggest another value?
Sure, because you know what?
Which one are you really gonna be,
What you,
which one do you engage with? Do you try
Right.
to do both, or?
loyalties usually trump values. Yeah. Disappoint people at a rate they can absorb, and loyalties trump values. If you walk away with nothing else, know those two things. Okay, how about quickly one more faction from somebody else? What's your issue in the middle, and what's a faction? Any other willing volunteers? Go for it. Sure.
That's misaligned with your project.
Okay, so you can have whatever your thing is in the middle, you can have a faction connected to this cultural value, and you can have a faction connected to this cultural value. And the idea is to get clear about all of those cultural values and get to a place where there's enough common ground that you're moving forward. And that's what we would call working across factions. If we just make the assumption that, well, they don't think like I do, or they don't care about what we do, or they definitely don't see this issue like a few of us do, we're just gonna dismiss them. That's the miss. That's where community progress stalls out or frankly falls apart. So you have to be willing to dig into this diagnostic work. The thing about an adaptive challenge is that it takes longer. We talk about technical challenges and adaptive challenges. We make a really clear distinction between the two. Technical are things like we've got enough funding, or we have the right software to track our donors. We've got the software we need and the equipment we need to run the services and initiatives that we want to. I've got the equipment I need to scale my business. That's technical. There's expertise out there to help make those technical things happen. That's really different. That is different work, and frankly, faster paced work than making progress on these things back here on the flip charts, right? There's no expert you can call in to solve for the competing values in your organization. There's no manual or textbook or policy that says, well, this is how we deal with it. We decide who we like and who we don't like, and we kick those out that we don't like, and then we move on. Like, there's not a policy or a procedure or a book that says this is what you do. So making progress on adaptive challenges takes longer. It is much slower paced work. And you have to involve the stakeholders or the factions. If I need my brakes fixed on my car, I'm gonna go to the mechanic and he's gonna fix my brakes. If I want my community to make progress on building a new library 50 years later, then I've got to do a different kind of work. And there are library architects. There are experts that know how to build libraries, but there are no experts in building community engagement and community buy-in. It just takes longer. It's harder work. enough of me pontificating. I wanted to give you one more tool, and Chris is going to hand it out, but it's another little worksheet coming around. You're going to get 2 again. This is the designing experiment, all right? So we're fast tracking all of these ideas. You've been here for 2 days. You're starting to name. You've been naming concerns and aspirations. Man, if we could make progress on this. And you come in here today and you're like, okay, we're going to talk about how to take it home. And Raquel and Chris moved me through this idea that it might not just be a technical problem, that's the problem. And they're helping me identify what some of the deeper, the deeply embedded challenges really are, and who those factions might be that are getting in the way. Or contributing, right? It's not just factions getting in the way, but factions get in the way and contribute. So now, okay, I'm gonna board a plane, or I'm gonna get in my car and I'm gonna go home tonight or tomorrow. I want you to be able to start thinking about designing some experiments that help you get more clear about how to work across these factions. Designing, KLC thinks a lot and encourages, builds people's capacity to be more experimental. If I tried this, if I had this conversation back home with so-and-so and this other so-and-so, and we talked about this tough challenge, I think we might actually discover what some of our shared purpose is. So I'm gonna schedule coffee with these 2 individuals and have a harder conversation than we're accustomed to having. That could be one experiment. Another experiment could be, I bet if I ask somebody else in the manufacturing space what challenges they faced when trying to scale up, I could probably learn something. Yeah, they're producing this and I'm producing that, and it doesn't matter what we're producing, but what were the challenges they faced and experienced when scaling up? I might have something to learn from them. So I'm gonna bring them in to talk to my production team. That's an experiment. Get in the mindset of designing multiple experiments that move you closer towards the end goal. This isn't about fixing or solving, it's about making progress in tiny incremental steps. Because again, doing tough adaptive challenges in businesses and organizations and communities is not a quick fix thing. If the software isn't working, go get new software. If you need a new piece of machinery or equipment, go buy it. If that person isn't, up to the challenge at work, fire them or relocate them or something, right? There are things you can do that are quick, but most of the time that's not what holds us back. It's these tough adaptive challenges around blame and ego and fear and overwhelmed and competing values. That's the stuff you have to design experiments around in order to make progress. So I encourage you, spend the next half day or tomorrow on the airplane home, whatever, designing some experiments. And then keep track of them. Hold on to it. It's like looking at a dashboard on your car. You know what's happening with your speed and your gas and everything else that shows up on your dashboard. Depends on your car and, whether you have an electric car or not. What shows up on the dashboard is different, but you have to pay attention to it. So pay attention to what your experiments are providing you. I thought if I'd had this conversation with these 2 folks that I might make more progress than I did, and I didn't. So, okay, who are the next 2 people that I need to have a conversation with? And maybe I discover after 2 or 3 of those that, a coffee shop talk isn't the way to go. So then you design a different experiment. But most of the time what happens, people just say, look, I've got an idea, I'm gonna lob it out there, I'm gonna chase it like crazy and throw all my money and time and effort and staff resources into it. And then you get down the line 6 months, a year, 5 years, and you're like, dang, that was not the right thing at all. Right? So start thinking, this is about reevaluating and doing better diagnosis work so that you don't get down the road and realize you were chasing the wrong thing to begin with. Okay, I'm gonna pause there for questions, because I saw your hand go up and that reminded me, oh, look at the clock, it's about time to go, and we wanted to leave time for questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect to that last idea you had about, getting down the road. And I think some of what I'm hearing from this too is the choices that we make along the way will impact how we make choices later. And
Yes.
sometimes it's not even arriving at the fact that you will be able to do this thing right now, but taking a diagnosis to say maybe now is not the time.
Possibly, yes. I'm not saying that you aren't experimenting anyway. Maybe you already are. We're just saying, what if you had pushed the pause button and done some diagnosis differently sooner? You might have had different experiments to try. Yeah. They maybe are, kansasleadershipcenter.org.
We're on
But
a website redesign right now. So
yeah.
that's why we're.
But if you don't find what you need, find Chris and I on the staff page, email us, and yeah. So time for questions. Yes?
Kind of careful, what about the faction that doesn't want to be reached because they don't want you to work with them? Can you rephrase that?
Yeah. What about the faction that doesn't want to be reached, that you do need? Is that what?
They know that you might be successful, you might not, they just don't want to be engaged.
Well, yeah, it's real. It is totally real. You got it.
I'm curious, do you have an example?
So our community, we're actually thrilled to say that we're building a fire station right now. And it was an absolute battle to challenge Northern Keene. And the biggest faction that we struggled with wasn't meetings, wouldn't talk to us, wouldn't listen to all the health reasons why we needed this for our community. And I'm just curious, because it's like, I think ultimately we were talking about the decision mechanism. We wanted to have the confidence that we didn't need their numbers, but we didn't know how big they were.
Yeah.
We knew they were active voters. And so we just finally put it down as okay, let's just go after everybody. We passed by 3 votes. It is now 1,500. So, and we lost the year before by 3 votes. And it counted 1,500.
You made progress.
It's always haunted me, this group that we knew was meeting, and we just couldn't get to them.
Sometimes you just have to count your casualties or acknowledge that they are and move on. Yes. You just might not get some. Now, if there's somebody on the cusp in their faction that, is also talking to, you might be friendly with, or they might have some trust, go find the people where you might have the most trust and credibility and have a conversation with them. Who knows what they end up doing with it, but, aside from just like, yes, we're gonna have casualties, just accept it and move on, or find some folks on the fringe and, do your best. But what you don't want to do is get caught in the trap of people pleasing. You can't get everybody.
But I do think it's helpful to.
I do think it's helpful to think in terms of segmentation. Like, I think another trap on faction maps is to loop too many people into one faction, but to rather view a faction as a 3-dimensional picture, and that there might be people that might be more or less loyal to the same loyalties as that faction. So, because it sounds like you peeled some off, maybe, at least 6 of them he's along the other way.
I've had an experience like that in a small town, New Hampshire, where this sounds exploitative, so I'm just gonna trust the room to realize that, but what we discovered is, if both spouses weren't attending the meeting, the non-attending spouse probably had a different point of view, like the lumping, the fashion, and
That happens in the
We-
veterinary office too, with your dog.
we, we started working the non-attending spouses.
Yeah.
Because they were gonna go into the voting booth too, and nobody was gonna know how they voted. And so we just started working those non-attending spouses, and we didn't try to have them go to those meetings or anything, but we just said, we know your family is involved in this, and we just wanted to have a conversation with you. And then again, the other thing was the non-attending spouses often.
Yeah, don't just.
Met with not in public or on a different reason, right? Like we're gonna go have knitting circle.
here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to get in your echo chambers and then pat yourselves on the back because you talk to 800 people that think just like you. There's some value in that, but don't get trapped there and think that you're doing all that you could do because you're just talking in echo chambers. Maybe you have a conversation with the faction that will never see it your way, and you can say, look, I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. I'm interested. Will you hear my perspective? Would you just spend 15 minutes with me? And who knows what they do with it, but make sure that you're getting outside of your echo chambers.
Because then they would talk to other people and then bring the issues, and then other people that didn't have it, like.
Right, you can't talk to everybody, but it's the ripple effect. Just make sure who your touch point is. Might be, doing ripple effects in other factions that, you're not gonna get to yourself. Because they have trust and credibility. What's that? Some of them you can, yes. You can talk to them, but not everybody might listen. That's a whole nother thing. Any other questions about these tools, these ideas? Like I said, we're committed to a time boundary of 12:30. If you want to hang around and come talk to us, we'll be here. But a couple more minutes, a couple more questions?
What about the fact that last kind of on the same thing, but they aren't on it, they're vocal, but they're not honest about their opposition?
It does, and if you think they're not, you can ask them about it. Right? So that, again. So,
Situations like that over the last couple of years, it's like, they say, this is what's in my way, and you accommodate that, and then it's.
it depends on how provocative of a person you are and how much how comfortable you are raising the heat. We talk about raising the heat a lot. Now, there are staff members at KLC that don't like to raise the heat, and then there are some of us that are fine with it. But raising the heat might mean you name the elephant in the room. It might mean you call somebody out on their duplicative behavior. Heat, yeah? Yeah, don't be afraid to raise the heat. Yeah. All right, well, it is 12:30. Thanks for hanging out with us.